Not because they were violent, but because they were quiet. So quiet, you didn't even realize what had just begun. It's been 2 years since that day. 2 years since my nephew asked me a question that changed everything. "Auntie, would you say yes if I told you what I really wanted?" I still hear it, clear as if it happened yesterday. And I still ask myself, how did we get there? How did a simple yes unravel the life I thought was safe? I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't searching for affection or attention or anything else. I had a husband. I had a home. And from the outside, you would have thought I had everything a woman could need. But loneliness. Loneliness doesn't knock on your front door. It seeps in through the cracks. It looks like eating dinner across from someone who barely meets your eyes. It sounds like silence stretched too thin, night after night. It feels like waking up beside a man who no longer sees you. Not really. And then Ethan came. My sister's boy. 19. Grieving. Lost. And in a house where no one noticed me anymore, he did. At first, it was harmless. Small things. A thank you for dinner. A conversation that lingered a little too long in the kitchen. A glance that held something neither of us dared name. I told myself he was just looking for comfort. I told myself I was only giving him warmth. I told myself it was innocent. Until it wasn't. Until one night, when the storm outside wasn't as loud as the storm inside me, when his voice broke through the dark. "Auntie, would you say yes if I told you what I really wanted?" And I should have said no. I should have stood up. I should have remembered every vow I'd made to myself, to my husband, to the life we'd built. But my heart didn't say no. My body didn't say no. And in that one fragile moment, I said yes. And that yes, that one yes, was enough to change everything. You think you know where your lines are until they blur. You think you know who you are until you hear yourself whisper yes when you should be screaming no. I never imagined how a single yes could shatter the woman I thought I was. And sometimes, the wish you grant is the one you'll regret forever. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, because some truths are whispered and some are confessed. And this one is just beginning. I used to walk these hallways feeling like a ghost. Not in some tragic, dramatic way. Just faded, present but not seen. Needed, but not wanted. Alive, but hollow. Daniel and I, we weren't always this way. I remember when we used to talk about everything, when a touch on my back meant something, when a look across the table could make me feel safe. But somewhere along the way, between the long hours at work, the missed anniversaries, the excuses, the silences that grew too big to name, we lost that. We became polite strangers. Sharing a house, not a life. And this house, God, it looked perfect. Everything in its place. A spotless kitchen. Art on the walls. Fresh flowers on the table every week, bought by me, of course. But it felt cold, like living inside a picture frame. Daniel buried himself in work. Phone calls late into the night. Emails over dinner. Trips that lasted longer and longer. And when he was home, he wasn't really here. He'd sit on the couch, scrolling endlessly. A smile, maybe. A nod. A kiss on the cheek if I was lucky. But never eyes that looked into mine. Never hands that reached for me without needing something. I'd given up asking. You learn after a while. You stop trying to fill the empty space. You just live beside it. And then Ethan moved in. My sister, God rest her soul, passed suddenly. Cancer. Fast. Cruel. She was all he had. So of course, we took him in. It was the right thing to do. He arrived with a single suitcase. Eyes too tired for 19. A heart carrying more grief than any boy should bear. I remember the first night he came, standing in our doorway, soaking wet from the rain, looking like a lost child trying to act like a man. I wrapped him in a towel, made him tea, sat with him until his shoulders stopped shaking. And in that moment, I saw him, really saw him, And maybe for the first time in a long while, someone saw me too. At first, it was innocent. Of course it was. He'd join me in the kitchen while I cooked. He'd ask about my day. He'd tell me about his classes, the things he missed about his mom, the emptiness he carried like a second skin. And I listened. I listened the way no one had listened to me in years. There was no grand intention behind it. No plan. Just two lonely people filling the silence for each other. But the house began to change. Or maybe I did. I'd catch myself lingering over conversations that should have ended. I'd notice the way his eyes would search mine when he spoke. I'd feel my heart quicken when he'd smile or laugh or simply be there in the room with me. It terrified me, but it felt so human. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he never said a word. He was gone more than ever. And when he was home, he was miles away behind a screen, behind a wall I couldn't climb anymore. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. One night, as I was setting the table, he looked at me and said, "Auntie, you always make things so beautiful." I don't think anyone tells you that enough. And something inside me broke open. It wasn't the words. It was being seen, being appreciated, being wanted. The house still looked the same, but inside, it felt different. Like the air was heavier. Like every glance lasted a beat too long. Like every brush of skin felt electric. I should have stopped it there. I should have drawn the line before it blurred. But when you've been starving for so long, even crumbs feel like a feast. And before I knew it, I was looking forward to his presence, to his questions, to his smiles that reached further than Daniel's ever did anymore. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself he needed comfort, that I was simply giving it. But deep down, I knew. I knew the weight of the looks we shared. I knew the warmth in the words we spoke. I knew that somewhere along the way, we were no longer just filling the silence. We were building something neither of us could name. And the worst part? I didn't want to stop. Because after so many years of feeling invisible, I was alive again. I was seen. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because I knew, the deeper we sank into this fragile connection, the harder it would be to climb back out. And yet, I kept sinking. One smile, one conversation, one heartbeat at a time. It was a rainy Saturday. The kind where the world outside feels washed out and heavy, and the house feels smaller somehow. Daniel was home, but not really. Locked away in his study again. I didn't ask what for. I'd stopped asking a long time ago. The rain tapped softly against the windows, steady, relentless. And in that quiet, I did what I always did. I cooked. It was silly, really. Cooking had become my ritual. My way of pretending that life still held something warm, something comforting. I had a roast in the oven, potatoes simmering on the stove, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air. And then, there he was, Ethan. Leaning against the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, hair still damp from the shower, t-shirt clinging to him just so. I glanced at him, smiled politely. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was just keeping me company. But my heart knew better. There was a weight to the air when he entered a room now, an awareness I couldn't shake. He stepped closer, watched me move from stove to counter, counter to oven. His eyes never left me. "Smells amazing," he said, voice low. "You always make things feel like home." My breath caught. Daniel hadn't said a word like that to me in I couldn't even remember how long. I laughed it off. Well, it's just dinner. But inside, something unfurled. Something fragile. I reached for the pepper mill, hand brushing past his. A spark. A shiver. Ridiculous. I scolded myself. But then another small touch. He handed me a wooden spoon. Our fingers met a held, just a second too long. And when I looked up, he was already watching me. Not like a boy. Not like a nephew. No. When he smiled at me, It wasn't a boy's smile. It was a man seeing a woman. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not out of obligation. Not out of politeness. Not because I was someone's wife or someone's aunt. But because I was me. And that was dangerous. I stirred the pot to steady my hands, focused on the motion, the rhythm, the sound of the spoon scraping the bottom of the pan. But my mind raced. Pull away. Keep this safe. Don't let it go further. And then his voice soft behind me. Auntie. I turned. Eyes met eyes. He stepped in, just enough to make my breath catch again. Auntie, can I tell you something? I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. And then, he made a wish. One that would change everything. One that would take my yes and turn it into a lifetime of questions. Auntie, would you say yes if I told you what I really wanted? And in that moment, the rain outside faded. The warmth of the kitchen turned cold. The air between us thickened, charged with something neither of us could name anymore. And I couldn't move, because I knew, whatever I said next, there would be no going back. I kept telling myself, it was just a connection. No harm in that, right? He was grieving. He needed comfort. And I was just giving him a little warmth, something familiar, something safe. That's what I told myself. But even as I said the words in my mind, over and over like a prayer, I could feel the cracks in them. Because the truth was, I wasn't just giving him something. I was taking something too. Taking those glances that made me feel alive again. Taking the soft way he said my name, like it meant something. Taking the weight of his gaze, lingering on me longer than it should have. And I was hungry for it. God, how starved I was. Daniel's face filled my mind cold, distant. I could count on one hand the number of times he'd touched me this past year. The times he'd looked at me, not through me. I used to be able to feel his love in the way he'd brush a strand of hair behind my ear. In the way his hand would find mine under the covers at night. Now? Nothing. A nod. A dry smile. A quick kiss that felt like a habit, not a want. And here was Ethan, this young man with grief in his eyes, and something else. Something dangerous. Something I wasn't supposed to want. But I did. And that was the worst part. I told myself he's hurting. He just needs someone. That's all this is. That's all it will ever be. But the more I said it, the less I believed it. Because deep down, beneath the guilt, beneath the shame, was the truth. I needed someone too. I needed to be seen. I needed to be wanted. I needed to feel like more than a ghost walking through her own life. And in those moments, when he looked at me with those tired, longing eyes, I wasn't his aunt. I wasn't someone married to a man who'd long since left me in every way but name. I was a woman. A woman who missed being touched. A woman who missed being chosen. A woman who missed feeling like she mattered. And that terrified me. Because wanting those things, it felt wrong. It felt selfish. But it also felt human. And the more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. I'd catch myself watching the clock, wondering when Ethan would come home. I'd wear a different blouse, just in case. I'd linger in the kitchen longer than I needed to, hoping for one more moment, one more smile, one more reason to feel alive again. I hated myself for it. And yet, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop the way my heart fluttered when he said my name. I couldn't stop the warmth that spread through me when his hand brushed mine. I couldn't stop the ache that grew deeper every time he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Some nights, I'd lie awake next to Daniel, tears slipping silently onto my pillow. Tears for what I wanted. Tears for what I'd already allowed to happen in my heart. I kept whispering to myself, it's not too late. You haven't crossed the line. Not yet. But some lines, they don't announce themselves. You only know you've crossed them when it's too late. After that night in the kitchen, everything changed. Or maybe I changed. I started noticing the small things more. How often Ethan was around me. How he'd drift into the room when Daniel wasn't there. How his presence had become the thing I quietly waited for. He was spending more and more time with me. At first, it seemed innocent enough. He'd linger while I cooked, sit at the table while I graded papers or folded laundry, offer to help carry in groceries. And I let him. I told myself he's lonely. He just lost his mother. This is what family does. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Because the way he looked at me, the way my breath would catch when he entered the room, the way my heart would quicken when he brushed past me, those weren't things I could explain away. And I wasn't trying very hard to. One evening, another storm outside. Daniel had called to say he'd be working late. Again. It barely surprised me anymore. I almost welcomed the silence his absence brought. I was in the living room, scrolling half-heartedly through the TV, trying to find something to fill the hours. Then Ethan appeared. Movie night, he asked, voice light, but there was something in his eyes. I hesitated. I should have said no. I should have drawn the line right then. But instead, I smiled. Sure, we chose an old movie. One I hadn't seen in years. One I knew would tug at the heart, make the room feel smaller, warmer. I told myself, it's just a movie. He needs comfort. This is fine. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, at first. But as the movie played, the space between us seemed to shrink. A glance here, a soft laugh there, a quiet comment that lingered longer than it should have. And then, that scene. A mother and son on screen, broken, clinging to each other through grief. I felt Ethan shift beside me. I looked over. Tears streamed down his face. Silent. Unstoppable. Without thinking, I reached out. Instinct. I pulled him toward me, arms wrapping around his shaking frame. I told myself, this is motherly. It's comfort. He needs this. But as I held him, something inside me cracked wide open. He buried his face in my shoulder, fists clutching my sweater, breath ragged. And still, I didn't let go. I couldn't. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Then his voice. Soft. Barely there. I just wish someone would hold me, without letting go. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest, and still my hand moved on its own. Slowly, almost painfully, I began to stroke his hair. Again and again, trying to convince myself this is motherly. This is what he needs. You're not doing anything wrong. But it wasn't that simple anymore. Because the way his body melted into mine, the way my fingers lingered a little too long, the way my own eyes burned with something I couldn't name, this wasn't safe. And I knew it. I told myself, just a little longer. Just until he stops crying. Just until this moment passes. But it didn't pass. It deepened. And then, his head tilted up. Our eyes locked. And in that gaze, something shifted. Something neither of us could take back. After that night on the couch, I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he'd clung to me. About the way his eyes had searched mine. About the way something unspoken had passed between us and hung there, thick in the air. I told myself, give it space. Step back. It was a moment of grief. That's all. But space was the one thing I couldn't seem to find. Because every glance now held a question. Every room we entered together felt smaller. And every part of me that had been numb for so long was awake again. Daniel was away on business. Another last-minute trip. I didn't protest. Why would I? The house felt empty without him, but not silent. Because now, every breath I took seemed louder. Every movement felt watched. That night, the storm returned. Wind rattled the windows. Rain lashed against the glass. Thunder rolled through the sky like some ancient warning. I was in bed, lights off, trying to steady my thoughts. Trying to pretend I wasn't waiting for something. Trying to pretend I hadn't checked my phone 3 times, hoping for a message that wouldn't come. And then, a soft knock. Barely there. My breath caught. I knew. I knew before I even moved. I should have stayed still. I should have ignored it. I should have locked the door. But instead, I rose, crossed the floor on trembling legs, and opened it. There he stood, Ethan, hair damp, eyes wide, glassy, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of something he could no longer carry alone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The storm roared behind him, casting flickers of light and shadow across his face. And then his voice, barely above a whisper. I wish you'd let me feel loved. Just once. My heart stopped. Everything inside me screamed, don't. Stop. Close the door. Now. But my feet didn't move. My hand didn't pull away from the frame. And my heart broke. Because in his voice, I heard my own longing. In his eyes, I saw every empty night, every unanswered need, every part of me that had been waiting for someone to say those words. He's hurting, I thought. I'm hurting. This isn't about desire. This is about emptiness. Just emptiness. I stepped aside. Barely. Enough. He entered. Slowly, like if he moved too fast, the moment would shatter. And so would we. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, fighting every instinct, every scream in my mind that told me to run. But then his voice again. Please, just hold me. That's all. I swallowed hard, nodded, and opened my arms. He folded into them like he belonged there, like he had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. His breath hitched against my neck. His hands trembled against my back. And mine. They moved without thought, fingers weaving through his hair, holding him tighter than I should have. And for one heartbeat, I forgot everything else. I forgot who I was. I forgot who he was. I forgot the life waiting just beyond that door. In that heartbeat, I let him feel wanted. I let myself feel alive. And then, our lips brushed. Not planned. Not deliberate. Not even a kiss, just the barest graze. But I didn't pull away. Not right away. And in that instant, everything I'd tried to hold together unraveled. Because a heartbeat is all it takes. A heartbeat is all it takes to unravel a lifetime. The morning after, I woke before the sun. For a moment, just a moment, I forgot. I lay there, eyes fluttering open, the sound of rain now faded to a dull patter. But then it hit me, the weight of what I'd done, of what I'd allowed, of what I couldn't take back. And the emptiness inside me grew so fast, so wide, I could barely breathe. I rolled to my side. He wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. The bed felt colder than it ever had. And the house felt different. Heavier. Like every wall had eyes now. Like every piece of furniture knew. I wrapped a sweater around me and made my way downstairs, heart pounding, hands trembling. The kitchen light was on. Coffee mug on the counter, half full, untouched. But Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I found a note, hastily scribbled on the notepad by the phone. Out for a bit. Back later. No auntie. No warmth. Just distance. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I sat at the table, the silence around me deafening. Every creak of the house felt louder. Every tick of the clock felt like a judgment. And my mind. It replayed that moment over and over. His head in my hands, his breath against my skin. Our lips meeting, lingering, just enough to destroy us both. I told myself it wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to happen. But the guilt didn't care. It sat in my chest like a stone. I tried to busy myself. Folding laundry I couldn't see, cleaning counters that didn't need it. But nothing drowned out the truth. I had crossed a line, and there was no uncrossing it. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The storm gave way to a cold, brittle light. Still no sign of Ethan. I told myself he needs space. He's processing. So are you. But underneath that, a deeper fear whispered, what if you've lost him? What if you've broken something beyond repair? And then, late afternoon, the front door creaked open. Footsteps, slow, uncertain. I froze, hands gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles ached. Ethan appeared in the doorway, eyes tired, face pale, shoulders drawn tight. And for a long moment, we just looked at each other. I wanted to speak, to say I'm sorry, to say it was a mistake, to say anything that could make this right. But my mouth wouldn't open, because no words were big enough to cover what had passed between us. Finally, his voice, soft, strained. Thank you for not pushing me away. And then he was gone. Up the stairs. Door closed. And I stood there, anchored in place by guilt and longing and a hollow ache I couldn't name. The house felt heavier. Every sound seemed louder. Every silence deafening. And when Daniel returned that evening, something was different. The way he looked at me longer, sharper, as if he sensed a shift.